cousin? That's something you might hear if you're around black folks who run into their cousins out in public. And they don't even have to be blood related. It could be the child of my mother's long-term friend, my close friend's cousin, or someone from the same hometown as me. It's just our way of letting the world know that this person is seen, is known, is special, and is one of mine. Do not mess with my cousin. And should they need something in that moment, here I am. On the other hand, if you run into that cousin who brings shame on the family, you might hide behind the clothing rack. I used to think this loud-mouthed expression was a black Southern thing until I went to Harlem, Detroit, and Oakland and heard it there too, which makes sense. The Great Migration carried millions of black folk from the South to the North and out West, carrying their Southern ways with them. And then I realized that our Southern ways ain't nothing but West African ways, which makes sense given the slave trade. Why then do we see ourselves as so different from one another? I'll tell you. The insistence that mainstream American culture is the right way or the only way inherently devalues other cultures' right to not only exist, but thrive. In order to create a society of workers, taxpayers, and landowners here in the U.S., before it was called that, those indigenous to the land had to be civilized. Their way of life didn't align with that of progress, so the goal was to reorganize it to the point that they'd be disgusted with their old ways. After convincing the government that education was cheaper and more effective than war, boarding schools became increasingly popular. The first priority was teaching the students English. The second was renaming them. The third was individualism. See, settlers and colonialists, they measure their worth by how much they accumulate. Indigenous nations, however, measured theirs by how much they shared. And the new way of life being pushed here called for more focus on me than we, and those who would not or could not conform faced dire consequences. At this point, we colonize ourselves. We tell our children they're wrong when they aren't using mainstream American English. We draw red lines through their dialect, which has been passed down from their ancestors. And we warn one another to give our newborns simple names instead of uncommon multisyllabic names like Trelani. And when we do have names that require assistance in pronunciation, we offer nicknames before they even finish trying to enunciate. By all means, avoid being a stereotype. This was particularly evident during Jim Crow. In almost all cities with significant black and white populations, there existed a place called across the tracks. Railroad tracks separated black neighborhoods from white ones, and all black folks, regardless how much money they made, lived on the same side of town. Poor white folks were often relegated to that side of town too. So the tracks were barriers of race and class. Integration, however, allowed those with the financial means to move on up across the tracks to bigger homes and better funded schools and medical facilities. But in order to be accepted by our new neighbors, we had to subscribe to respectability politics by mirroring what was considered proper or standard. We couldn't afford to look or sound anything like those still living across the tracks, AKA the hood or the ghetto. In the middle of my 6th grade year, I was placed in the gifted program, which we called the SMART team. And on the SMART team, most of the students lived in the suburbs. Those who weren't considered gifted, most of them lived in the hood. Well, when I was talking with my friends on the SMART team, I spoke proper like them. And when I was with my other friends, I reverted to talking fast, laughing loud, saying things like over there instead of over there, and glossing my lips to greasy perfection, which was cool then. I was like Clark Kent, hopping in and out of the phone booth from grade school on through college, and I pretty much mastered it until my book signing party when I was 24 years old. It was my first time bringing my friends from both sides of the track together and figuring out what to wear, what foods to serve, what music to play, and who to be stressed me out way more than it should have. Where culture is most abundant, resources are most limited. The Sea Islands are an excellent example of this. Prior to the construction of bridges, resorts, and subdivisions, Geechee folk in the Georgia and South Carolina Sea Islands lived, and still do, in kundas. That's a Geechee word for family compounds, with a language and lifestyle that closely resembles our cousins in West Africa. But on the other hand, a lot of them ain't get telephone lines or electricity into the 1970s. Later than that for some. Black folks living next to white folks tend to have the opposite experience. More money and access, but an absence of their own artistic, aesthetic, and emotional center. So we're all suffering. Belonging is a psychological need, no more or less than paying the bills. But abandoning your culture in the name of fitting in is harmful. That separation generates hostility within oneself and among each other. We wear the mask, as Paul Laurence Dunbar so poetically expressed, for survival and for acceptance, but assimilating is exhausting. It creates an inner division, a me versus me, and a disassociation from the community, calling for more focus, again, on me than we. One of my favorite quotes is by writer Audre Lorde, and she states that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Disconnection is one of the master's primary tools, disconnection from your culture and disconnection from yourself. And often, your own people are the ones employed to do the work of disconnecting. So in order to bring about genuine change, we all have to consider the ways in which we're forbidding folk to show up as their colorfully cultural selves. And language is key. Another favorite writer of mine, Ntozake Shange, said that, "I'm a firm believer that language and how we use language determines how we act. And how we act then determines our lives and other people's lives." I had an unforgettable experience with a literal neighbor across the street from me who I jokingly referred to as Trump because of the flag in his front yard. My boyfriend, who I already knew him, will correct me every time. His name is Kirk. Well, several times a day, Kirk will walk his dog, and if I was jogging the subdivision and we passed one another, we do the neighborly nod. And then I stopped seeing him. He'd been diagnosed with cancer. So the next time I so happened to catch him through the blinds, I threw on some clothes, flew out the door and down the sidewalk. "You mind if I walk with you?" I asked. "Sure," he said. His sure wasn't punctuated with the exclamation mark that I was hoping for, but my neck was already out there. And we had a great conversation, which extended to an invitation for me to join him anytime I saw him out, and I did. We talked about my work as a writer, oral historian, and teaching artist, about our children, our hometowns, the evolution of the neighborhood, and how good a simple cheeseburger can be. Needless to say, I began to see him beyond his flag and began calling him our friend Kurt, who I couldn't have any less in common with. Him, a white retired baby boomer from the north, me, a working black millennial from the south. We have to understand and trust our connection with one another. We also got to be willing to cross the tracks for fellowship without rejection or judgment or hiding behind a clothing rack, without pretenses or penance, because it won't work if anybody is wearing a mask or hopping in and out of the phone booth. Proximity and authentic self-expression empowers us with a global pool of resources to get freer, faster. But it's difficult to keep our connection through our cries for justice because they vary depending on what side of the tracks you're on. But when you're looking to connect with those that you consider different from yourself, it's our memories and our expressions of joy. That's where we hit the jackpot. I see it all the time on social media. If I post my grandmother's homemade medicines, recipes for red rice, ring shouting in church, second lining in New Orleans, I get comments from people all around the world saying that their grandmamas did the same, that their recipes for jambalaya, jollof, or arroz rojo is nearly identical, and that they worship and dance the same way. And all I can do is smile and say, "Cousin."